Every morning for 50 years, old George Halloran walked into the same diner, sat in the same booth, ordered 2 cups of coffee, and drank only one. The other he set across the table in front of an empty chair where it sat untouched until it went cold. He did this every single day for half a century, and in all that time, not one soul ever knew why. The diner was called Ruby's, a small, worn, friendly place on the main street of Cedar Falls, the kind of diner that never changed and never wanted to. George had been coming there since he was a young man, and now he was 78, a quiet, widowed farmer who worked a modest spread just outside of town. Every morning at 7 o'clock sharp, no matter the weather, no matter the season, George's old pickup would pull into the lot, and the old farmer would shuffle in, hang his cap on the hook by his booth, and settle into the same seat he'd sat in for 50 years. "Morning, George," the folks would say. "Morning," he'd answer, and nothing more. He'd order his 2 coffees, always 2, and he'd sit there for an hour, sipping one and gazing across the table at the empty chair and the second cup he never drank. Sometimes his lips would move, just slightly, as though he were speaking to someone only he could see. Then he'd leave a tip, put his cap back on, and drive home to his farm. The same ritual every single day for 50 years. The diner had changed hands 3 times over those decades. Waitresses had come and gone by the dozens, cooks had retired, owners had passed on. The menu had been rewritten 100 times, but George and his 2 coffees remained, a fixture as permanent as the counter itself. The regulars had long since stopped wondering about it. "That's just George," they'd say. "He's always done that. Nobody knows why and nobody asks." It had become one of those small-town mysteries that everyone simply accepted, the way you accept the weather or the phases of the moon. Then, one autumn, a new waitress started at Ruby's. Her name was Emily, and she was just 19 years old, working the morning shift to help pay her way through community college. She was a bright, warm-hearted girl, curious about everyone and everything, and it didn't take her long to notice the old farmer in the corner booth and his strange, sad ritual. She watched him for weeks. Every morning, 2 coffees. Every morning, the empty chair. Every morning, that faraway look in his eyes as he gazed at the seat across from him. Emily's heart ached for him, though she couldn't have said exactly why. There was such a tenderness in the way he set that second cup down, such gentle care, as though he were serving it to someone he loved more than anything in the world. The other staff warned her not to pry. "We don't ask George about the chair," the old cook told her. "Been coming here longer than any of us. If he wanted us to know, he'd tell us. Leave the man his peace." And Emily tried. For weeks she held her tongue, but the mystery of that empty seat tugged at her, and the sadness in the old man's eyes wouldn't let her be, until one quiet, rainy Tuesday morning, when the diner was nearly empty and George sat alone in his booth with his 2 coffees, Emily finally worked up the courage. She refilled his cup, and then, gently, she slid into the seat across from him, into the empty chair, and she asked him, "George," she said softly, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but I've been wondering for weeks now, the second cup of coffee, the empty seat, who is it for?" The old farmer looked up at her, startled. For a moment Emily was afraid she'd offended him, overstepped some sacred boundary. But then something in his weathered face softened, and his old eyes filled with tears, and he smiled, a small, sad, beautiful smile. "Nobody's ever asked me that," George said quietly. "In 50 years, nobody has ever once asked." And then, for the first time in half a century, the old farmer told the story of the empty seat. Her name had been Eleanor, he said, and she had been the love of his entire life. They'd met at that very diner, back when George was a young man of 25, and Eleanor was a waitress there, working the morning shift just as Emily did now. George had come in one morning for breakfast, and Eleanor had poured his coffee, and she'd smiled at him, and George had known in that very instant that he was going to marry her. He'd come back every single morning after that, just to see her, ordering coffee he didn't want just to sit at her counter a little longer. It took him 3 months to work up the nerve to ask her to dinner. She said yes, and a year later, in this same diner, at this same booth, George had gotten down on one knee and asked Eleanor to be his wife. They were married for 43 years. They ran the farm together, weathered every hardship together, loved each other more deeply with each passing year. They were never able to have children, and so they'd poured all that love into each other, becoming, as George put it, each other's whole world. And every single morning of their married life, the two of them came to this diner, to this booth, and shared 2 cups of coffee and the quiet talk of 2 people who never tired of each other's company. It was their ritual, their sacred hour, the way they began every day of their lives together for 43 years. Then Eleanor got sick. It was a long illness and a cruel one, and George nursed her through every day of it. And near the end, when Eleanor knew she didn't have much time left, she'd taken her husband's hand and made a strange, small request. "When I'm gone," she'd told him, "I don't want you to stop coming to the diner. I want you to keep going, every morning, just like always, and I want you to order 2 coffees, one for you and one for me, and I'll be there, George, every morning, right across from you, in my seat. You won't be able to see me, but I'll be there. So don't you ever drink alone. You keep our morning coffee going, and I'll keep meeting you there every single day until it's your turn to come and join me. Promise me." And George had promised. Eleanor passed away that winter, and the very next morning, and every morning for 50 years since, George Halloran walked into that diner, sat in their booth, ordered 2 coffees, and shared his morning with the wife he could no longer see, but had never for one single day stopped loving. The second cup wasn't a sad thing, he explained to Emily. It was the opposite. It was the 1 hour of his day when Eleanor felt close again, when he could talk to her, tell her about the farm, share the quiet the way they always had. For 50 years, that empty seat hadn't been empty at all. Not to George. "Folks think I'm a lonely old man," George said, wiping his eyes, "but I've never once had my morning coffee alone, not in 50 years. She's right there every morning, in that seat you're sitting in now, keeping our promise, same as me." By the time he finished, Emily was weeping, and so was the old cook who'd drifted over to listen, and so were the 2 other patrons in the diner that rainy morning. The story of the empty seat, kept secret for half a century, had finally been told, and it was the most beautiful and heartbreaking thing any of them had ever heard. Word spread through Cedar Falls fast after that, and the whole town, which had accepted George's ritual for 50 years without ever understanding it, was moved to tears to finally learn what it meant. People started coming into Ruby's just to see the old farmer and his 2 coffees, not out of curiosity now, but out of respect, out of love. The diner put a small brass plaque on the wall above George's booth. It read, "Reserved every morning for George and Eleanor Halloran, 50 years and counting." George kept coming every morning for 2 more years, and young Emily made it her personal duty to serve him herself every single day, to bring him his 2 coffees with a gentle smile, and sometimes, when it was quiet, to sit for a few minutes in Eleanor's seat and listen to George tell stories about the wife he'd loved so long and so well. The old farmer and the young waitress became dear friends, and George came to think of her almost as the granddaughter he'd never had. Then, one autumn morning, George didn't come. Emily knew the moment 7 o'clock passed and his old pickup didn't pull into the lot that something was wrong. George Halloran had passed away peacefully in his sleep the night before, in the farmhouse he'd shared with his Eleanor for so many years. He was 80 years old, and the whole town of Cedar Falls grieved him as they would have grieved family. But here is the part of the story that the folks in Cedar Falls still tell to this day, the part that gives them chills and fills their eyes every time. On the morning after George died, Emily came into the diner early before it opened, her heart broken, and she walked to George's booth and she did something she felt she simply had to do. She poured 2 cups of coffee and she set them both down on the table, one on each side, because now, she thought, they were together again. Now neither one of them would ever have to drink alone. And Emily kept that up. Every single morning after that, she set 2 cups of coffee at George and Eleanor's booth in memory of the love that outlasted death itself. She did it for the rest of the years she worked at Ruby's, and when she finally moved on, she made the next waitress promise to keep it going, and that waitress made the next one promise too. To this very day, if you walk into Ruby's Diner in the little town of Cedar Falls, you'll find one booth in the corner that's always set with 2 cups of coffee in the morning, across from each other, warm and waiting.